Hey, what's up everybody and welcome back to News Dose, and I'd say by this point it's difficult keeping up with the Activision Blizzard acquisition. I mean, oh my goodness, over the last 2 weeks it's just been rapid fire, one story after another, after another, after another. But late last night we got an official announcement from Phil Spencer himself that could completely change the tide in Microsoft's favor. This certainly, without a doubt, puts Sony and Regulators in an awkward spot because it's going to be extremely, and yes, I said extremely difficult to come up with a narrative that this buyout is quote-unquote bad for gamers. Seriously, Microsoft? GG, because they might have just won in one fell swoop. So we're going to go over all that today, as well as some big PlayStation games leaking out online. One might be announced as early as the Game Awards, and then for the other one, I mean, quite simply, it's just exciting to say the least. As always, though, I mean, you know it. Let's just go and jump right into it, starting off with Final Fantasy Crisis Core Reunion. This game does release next week on December 13th, and I have to say, I'm pretty stoked to play this one myself. It is a remaster of an old PSP game, but when you actually see this game, it honestly fits more into that remake moniker. Square Enix did a phenomenal job at updating the character models in this game, making it feel like a must-have companion for the Final Fantasy VII remakes, especially as we lead into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This might be a good title to pick up and play. And that's really the reason that you're gonna want this game. We'll come back to that here in just a second, but the reason that we're talking about Reunion today is because reviews are already making their way online, and as you can see here, it currently sits at a 77 overall score on Metacritic with 47 reviews as of this recording. Now, from what I've seen, it's an enjoyable quote-unquote remaster with modern-day visuals. It's got new voice dialogue, which that's very, very nice, and they updated some other things like the battle UI and things like that. But as for the game itself, it is mostly a one-to-one remake. Now, so don't expect any big changes or anything like that, but based on the reviews, it does seem like most critics believe that it more than holds up in 2022, making for a must-own for any Final Fantasy VII fan. That there, though, is kind of the thing, because I saw some reviews knock it for that exact reason, and I thought that was a little strange. Take this review by Metro Game Central as an example that says, an inspired piece of Final Fantasy VII fan service and a very good remaster, but as a standalone game, the story and gameplay has very little value. They give it a 4 out of 10, and I think based off of this reason, I find that to be ridiculous. Crisis Core is absolutely made for Final Fantasy VII fans, so of course it's not meant to be a standalone game. It's a part of a, grander package. The entire point is to give Final Fantasy VII more of a backstory that leads to the events of Final Fantasy VII. It's not to detract from Final Fantasy VII itself, but rather it's to add to it. So yeah, I disagree with this stance here, but I will say this much. That is kind of an issue in a sense that Square Enix does have the remakes exclusively on PlayStation. That there is a bit of a problem, but Crisis Core Reunion will be out next week, so look forward to that. Now, we also got an update for Spongebob the Cosmic Shake as they dropped a brand new gameplay trailer alongside its release date. It is now officially slated to release on January 31st, so just a little over a month away. I know I'm personally looking forward to this game myself. This is the successor to Battle for Bikini Bottom after all, and if you haven't played that game already, it's honestly one of the most surprisingly good 3D collectathon platformers. It's not really something that you'd expect from an IP like SpongeBob, and I don't really know exactly where I'd rank this game, but it is among some of the better 3D platformers ever made, and the Cosmic Shake looks like it might actually be even better. From everything that they've shown, including this new trailer here, you can see the level design is top-notch. It's got that humor and lovable SpongeBob personality to it. There's a lot of throwbacks to the show, as well as the old Battle for Bikini Bottom game. If anything, if you like 3D platformers, especially during like the early 2000s, games like that, you might want to keep an eye on this one. If you ever wonder why I like THQ Nordic though, this here is the exact reason. I think that they offer something different than we see from other publishers out there, and it is great to see a publisher like this take a chance on these style of games. Hopefully it will pay off though when it releases next month, again on January 31st. Alright, so let's just go and get into the big story here, and really has to just say the massive story here being about the Activision Blizzard acquisition. Late last night, Phil Spencer made some monumental announcements that's not only good news for all gamers, but it is a strategic maneuver that paints Sony into a corner against regulators, which that is the very, very important part here. We'll get into that in just a moment. First, though, we will take a look at the actual announcements made. Phil Spencer posted this over on Twitter. Microsoft has entered a 10-year commitment to bring Call of Duty to Nintendo following the merger of Microsoft and Activision Blizzard King. Microsoft is committed to helping bring more games to more people. However, they choose to play. He then goes on to say that I'm also pleased to confirm that Microsoft has committed to continue to offer Call of Duty on Steam simultaneously to Xbox after we have closed the merger with Activision Blizzard King. So there's no other way to say this than this is massive news in really multiple different ways. First off, Nintendo fans, you all just want to hear. Activision up to this point doesn't really support Nintendo with Call of Duty, but Microsoft is now officially vowing to change that after the acquisition. So now, one of the industry's most popular franchises will be available on Nintendo platforms for at least 10 years, and I do imagine that will be extended well beyond that. Now, there is that question on how they can bring this to fruition, though. Obviously, the Switch isn't exactly the most powerful console in the world, so, it could prove difficult to get Call of Duty running on the Nintendo Switch. But I don't think that that's really a problem here. First off, if we're talking about the Switch specifically, which we're not, to be clear, more on that in just a second, but there are ways to get Call of Duty running on Switch hardware. Take a look at something like Doom Eternal or The Witcher 3. Both of those games run natively on the Switch by downgrading their visuals. And while that might not necessarily be an easy thing to do, it all just kind of depends on the game, but it might be possible to do something similar with Call of Duty. There's also another way to go about this, which could actually be an even easier solution, and that's by simply just putting a cloud version on a Switch. Now, we've already seen that with other Switch games like Control and Resident Evil Village as an example. So in terms of Switch hardware, yes, Microsoft absolutely can make this happen one way or the other. But here's where things kind of get interesting, because you have to also kind of keep in mind we are getting closer to the looming Switch successor. And as long as that offers a considerable power upgrade, which I think we kind of expect, porting Call of Duty will become even easier. Now, that might not necessarily be the situation immediately. We don't know exactly when a Switch successor will be out. I think most people seem to believe it'll be out in 2024, maybe late 2023 if we're lucky. But again, Microsoft entering a contract with Nintendo to bring Call of Duty, one of the most popular franchises, period, to their platform is massive news and great for all gamers. Think of it this way. If this acquisition does indeed go through, which is increasingly likely, well, this essentially means that Call of Duty is now confirmed to be available for the life of Nintendo's next console. So with that, the Switch successor immediately just got better. Of course, though, this extends to Steam as well. Now, Call of Duty already recently returned to Steam, we know this, but by ensuring Call of Duty will remain on Steam, that is great for PC gamers, considering that's by far the most popular PC platform. We've seen it with the Epic Games storefront. People get frustrated when games are exclusive to that platform. So yeah, this is fantastic news. Now, actually, Valve's Gabe Newell, the legendary Gabe himself, did respond to this announcement, which will lead us into our primary point. So yeah, let's just go over what he said here. This was a statement made to Kotaku, which says, Microsoft offered and even sent us a draft agreement for a long-term Call of Duty commitment, but it wasn't necessary for us because A, we're not believers in requiring any partner to have an agreement that locks them to shipping games on Steam into the distant future. B, Phil and the games team at Microsoft have always followed through on what they told us they would do, so we trust their intentions. And C, we think Microsoft has all the motivation they need to be on the platforms and devices where Call of Duty customers want to be. Now, that statement is incredibly telling, as it's a shot fired directly at Sony and their consistent complaints to regulators that they are concerned about the foreclosure of Call of Duty after the contract ends. Now, Microsoft from day one has been adamant that they intend to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation, and they've had several discussions with them about their intents. But even then, Sony, as we all know, has remained stubborn over this topic by rallying the troops and planting seeds of concern within regulators. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you probably know my stance on this. I believe Sony is 100%, without a doubt, being disingenuous, because I think that they know for a fact that Microsoft is telling the truth as Valve even says here. But this has been Sony's primary argument to keep this buyout from happening, and that is their goal. Because they also know, with Microsoft owning Activision Blizzard, it will impact Sony's PlayStation business in a number of different ways. First off, they fear Activision Blizzard games going to Xbox Game Pass. That could impact Sony because instead of having to buy a $70 game, well, people can just kind of move over to Xbox Game Pass and get it for $10 a month. But also, Sony will lose the marketing rights and exclusive DLC for Call of Duty, which has been a big moneymaker for them. Now, that's always kind of been an ironic argument in the first place, but regardless, Sony's goal has always been to create concern with these regulators to stop this buyout. That's all there is to this. It's never been about their quote-unquote concern about Call of Duty exclusivity. They know that that's not going to happen. It's the same as Minecraft. Microsoft wants this on as many platforms as they possibly can get it on because that's how they can make a ton of money on the Call of Duty franchise. I'll tell you this much though. Microsoft is still offering Sony a 10-year contract for Call of Duty. So far, they've declined to comment on this offer, but because of that, they look terrible here because I guarantee you both Valve and Nintendo are absolutely thrilled that they got the exact same offer. And that could very much resonate with these regulators. In fact, gamers should be thrilled about this contract. And there's the thing about this entire situation and why this move was so incredibly smart by Microsoft. It puts both Sony and regulators in an awkward position. There is now no way that they can argue that this is quote-unquote bad for gamers. To put things into perspective here though, if they primarily want to focus on Call of Duty, which is what they've done so far, we've seen this with several different regulators, they're all focused on Call of Duty. Well, Microsoft has addressed that concern. Call of Duty, after the acquisition, will be available on Xbox. It'll be available on Game Pass. It'll be available on Steam, Nintendo, PlayStation, and it'll even be available on mobile devices, partially thanks to their cloud platform. Not one single gamer will be affected negatively. PlayStation fans will in fact still be able to play Call of Duty in the exact same way that they've always been able to. Xbox fans, well, they'll get an extra option with the inclusion of Xbox Game Pass, which is the big perk for them. That actually also extends to PC. As for PC, Call of Duty, of course, will also be guaranteed on Steam, and Nintendo fans just got one of the most popular IP promised for their platform as well. All gamers win here. This is such an incredibly smart and strategical move by Microsoft. You know that phrase of one's playing checkers and the other's playing chess? Yeah, that kind of applies here. Microsoft, they've been playing chess here. If regulators want to take this to court, I think with this will be a slam dunk win for Microsoft. No doubt about it. In my mind, this changes absolutely everything. Now, speaking of Sony, though, I will leave you with this one last quote by Microsoft's Brad Smith, which says, "Our acquisition will bring Call of Duty to more gamers and more platforms than ever before. That's good for competition and good for consumers. Thank you, Nintendo. Any day Sony wants to sit down and talk, we'll be happy to hammer out a 10-year deal for PlayStation as well." Microsoft is very clearly throwing shade at Sony here by making them look terrible, and I mean terrible, in the public eye, and most importantly, showing regulators that they are not being genuine with their concerns. Yeah. Well played, Microsoft. Well played. GG. Now, I actually do have some exciting news for PlayStation, though, as a couple of big games appears to have leaked out early, one of which I'm personally highly interested in. We'll get into that one in just a moment. But first is the one that might be announced as early as the Game Awards, being an expansion for Horizon Forbidden West. Now, I don't think that this should come as a major surprise. Of course, with Zero Dawn, they had the Frozen Wilds expansion, and it appears that they plan to do something similar here with the Forbidden West. This leak, though, does come from The Snitch, which has proven to be very accurate in the past, and then posted up by Insider Gaming. As you can see here, it says, "Popular leaker, The Snitch has teased yet another announcement that will be made in the near future." On Twitter, The Snitch posted an image of San Francisco, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. The image is seemingly a nod to the Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores DLC taking place in these locations. It then goes on to say the Burning Shores is mentioned by name a couple of times throughout Horizon Forbidden West. It's referred to in Gildan's diary as being south of the Spine Break and was referenced by Bryn as being the place of flames and brine. Players players who attempt to explore further south are currently told to turn back, as it's likely this is the new location for the DLC. So yeah, it looks like we already have an idea of what this expansion will be about, and considering the timing of this leak, yeah, I'd say that there's a pretty good chance that we get the official announcement as early as tomorrow at the Game Awards. It really kind of feels like everything is leaking out, but I'll say this much. It does sound like this potentially could be a good showcase. I'm always a little weary of Jeff Keighley showcases. I've not really been a huge fan of his showcases in the past, but I mean, if some of these leaks turns out to be true, I mean, it could make for one of the better showcases in recent memory. Now, as for Horizon Forbidden West, though, I personally think that this is one of the best games to release this year, so I'll be thrilled to jump back in with an expansion if that is announced soon. As for this other game, though, and this is something that we have talked about on various occasions, but thanks to the leak.co, we can add more fuel to the fire. It's claimed that Sony is indeed working on an Uncharted reboot. Now, according to this leak, though, it's not being handled by Naughty Dog themselves in the typical sense. Instead, it's reportedly coming from an unknown developer, with Naughty Dog initially helping out in the early stages of development. Now, this, though, does line up with exactly what we've already heard. Everything seems to point at Sony creating a new internal studio, which, from what we've seen in job listings, this new studio is collaborating with Naughty Dog. So this here all lines up. The question really then kind of becomes, is this particular leak accurate? And while there's no 100% guarantee, Insider Gaming also said that they have heard similar rumblings. They couldn't necessarily confirm it, but this definitely seems like an ongoing rumor at the very least. I think for me, though, the big question is their wording of a reboot. See, if Sony wants to continue Uncharted, that's perfectly fine. It's actually one of my all-time favorite franchises. But I personally believe that they need to move on from Nathan Drake and focus on different characters instead. His story was wrapped up perfectly in Uncharted 4, so don't sour that experience by rebooting his story. I, however, believe what they could do here is to make a new game that centers around his daughter, and then Nathan could play a role similar to how the Gears franchise was handled going into its second trilogy. You know, Marcus Phoenix and some of those characters from the original trilogy, they're still there, but instead it focuses on a newer generation of characters. That's kind of my mindset about all of this, but as a huge fan of Uncharted myself, I do love the idea of Uncharted continuing into the future. Let's go and take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all. Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion will be out next week. We talked about this earlier. But with the remakes not available on Xbox or Nintendo, will you be purchasing Reunion on either of those devices? Now, as you can see here, 23% of you said yes, 17% of you said no, you'll get it on PlayStation, and then 38% of you said no, it makes no sense to buy on Nintendo or Xbox currently. So that's a pretty decent sized portion that's unfortunately going to skip out on it, because the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth are exclusive to PlayStation for the time being. Now, as we kind of talked about earlier, it does seem like Reunion is a good remake, remaster, whatever you want to call it, but it is also kind of a part of a grander package. So that's not really a great situation for Nintendo and Xbox fans, especially Xbox, because, I mean, we know for a fact that it can run on Xbox. I mean, there's excuses on why it can't come to the Switch. But at the same time, though, I will say this. At the very least, the original Final Fantasy VII experience is available on both Xbox and Nintendo, so do kind of keep that in mind, but I do completely understand where you're all coming from here. This release is flawed in the sense that it would be better with those remakes on other platforms. Hopefully that'll change sometime in the future, because these are such good and beloved games. So it is a shame that fans are in the dark as to how long they'll have to wait to play these on other devices. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.